Casey, can you hear me? Fantastic, good. I'm quite used to saying Sean, can you hear me? So it requires a little bit of a change of pace there. I can see our audio is definitely going through on the little VU meters, so it looks like we're good. So welcome to Calico Live. So I think we'll switch it around and I'll just introduce what Calico Live is for kind of your benefit as well as the audience's benefit first, and then who we are. So Calico Live is intended to be kind of an occasional informal live video stream series. So it's not heavily scripted. We do have a loose script that we're working to, but it's more about us having a chance to kind of relax and take some time to kind of chat and check in a kind of less formal way. When Sean and I have been doing this, it's been kind of the afternoon for both of us, which is quite nice, but it's a bit brutal for you. You've got a really early start, so I hope you're all coffeeed up. Awesome, nice. Yeah, I've got Chinese tea at the moment. So the first 5 episodes that we did, we're getting reports of having a big echo coming from somewhere, which we don't usually have. Let me see if I can figure out why that is. Thank you, Nathan, for pointing that out. Let's see if I can figure out why that is. You've got headphones on, so it can't be. You're coming out of my headphones, so it can't be feeding back at my end. My VU meters are moving normally. Why would that be? Nathan, it's still happening now, is it? The trouble is he's 20 seconds behind us, so we won't know for a few seconds. We'll have to chat about the weather, Casey. We had thunderstorms here today, which is actually quite unusual for the UK. Oh really? I kind of always imagined it was. I've been to San Francisco only for a few days. We're not hearing from Nathan again. So I think what we'll probably have to do, Casey, is both mute when we're not speaking and hope that makes a difference. Casey, another user's asking if you hear the echo, but you don't, right? Neither of us. No, I don't hear an echo either. That's weird. It sounds totally fine for both of us. All right, so just making sure this isn't. All right, let's see what we'll do. We will just carry on, and we'll both mute when we're not speaking, and then the guys can tell us guys and girls can tell us in the messages if it's a problem still, and we'll have to go from there. If it's totally unusable, then we'll have to reschedule. But I literally can't see anything wrong, so I'm not quite sure what to do. All right, so let's push on anyway. So we did 5 episodes about diving into the eBPF data plane. Sean and I went into a lot of kind of interesting technical details, and frankly, I learned a few cool things. And then episode 6, we did a Calico Live 5th birthday special where Ratan came on. We chatted about kind of where the company's been and where we're going, and that's cool. And now we've got a couple of episodes with you. We can only have a couple because it's so early for you. So to introduce Casey, Casey's principal engineer at Tigera. He is one of the lead maintainers for Calico. He's worked on SDN, software-defined networking, right back since 2012, and is an active Kubernetes community member and currently co-chairs the Kubernetes networking SIG. My intro, I feel bad doing it because I've done it so many times, but I'm a developer advocate at Tigera. I kind of champion our users and contribute to community. I've also worked in networking for a long time, since 2000, and I got interested in SDN when I was just sick and tired of CLIs and configuring devices one at a time and special snowflakes. So just an update on the audio problem thing. We've had a couple of people saying it's workable now. So let's just push on, and I guess we'll have to, after this session, you and I can do a test and see if we can figure out what's going on. Cool. So the other thing to say is, as the people who dialed in know, we really love to get questions. So we do have an agenda, but we're so happy to be derailed. Please feel free. But without further ado, I thought we could start off with learning a bit about Casey and his background and how he came to be doing this. So, Casey, before we even talk about SDN and Tigera and Calico, when did you actually get into coding, if you don't mind me prying? Casey, this sounds absolutely awesome. Hold that thought because I'm getting complaints that they now can't hear you at all, which is really gutting. I'm wondering if we can't get this to work in a couple of minutes. I think we might make our apologies and have to test this again. 1 second, because I believe I can be heard. So those who can hear me, just hold tight. Give us 1 more second here. We'll make a decision in a couple of minutes, and if I can't get this to work, then we'll have to reschedule. Casey was just telling us some amazing stuff, which involved bomb defusal robots, which is cool. This is literally the first I've heard of it. 1 second while I try and live fix this stream whilst also hosting the stream. No pressure. Test. Casey, can you say something?
Can you hear me now?
Ooh, we might be in business. I think we might be in business. Not only that, I think we might have fixed the audio, the echo, I mean. So we need to wait 20 seconds for the people online to confirm, but I think we might be in business. I see the both faders moving, and they're not moving at the same time, which implies no echo. So let's just hold on for a sec. In a second, I'm going to try and tell you what I think you told me. Yes, good, right. We just got feedback that I believe we're good now. I'm really sorry for the trouble, folks. As usual, when you know, all we did is switch one party, and it caused all kinds of mayhem in me having to reconfigure my streaming setup and things. Okay, right. Brilliant. We can be properly heard at last. Fantastic. So I'm going to try and do my homework now and see if I can actually repeat what you just said to me. So Casey, you said that. You said that you got into you did electrical engineering, then you wanted to do audio stuff, which is interesting because, ironically, haven't we essentially just been solving spanning tree for audio there with the the looped audio, and yeah. So the bit you started saying, I had to interrupt. You were saying about bomb defusal robots. Well, how's that come into it?
Yeah, it's not as exciting as it sounds, but I thought I'd throw that in there because it is kind of a cool thing. I mean, this is all mostly hardware at this point, but I did a 6-month stint at a place that did robots, and got a little bit of exposure to to software while doing that, but like I said, it was mostly hardware. And as exciting as it sounds, I started to get kind of sick of it. So by the last like year and a half or so of my time at university, I was thinking I might be kind of burnt out on all this hardware stuff. And so I mostly on a whim took a class in object-oriented programming, having never done any programming before. Yeah, I was in a little bit over my head to start, but eventually found that I really enjoyed it. And then for my last internship, I said I'm going to try to get one in software. And that's actually where I ended up getting that internship with Metaswitch.
Right. Okay.
Which is based out of the UK, but they had an office in San Francisco. I really wanted to get across the country, try something in software. It seemed like a perfect fit.
Yeah, cool.
And so yeah, so that's sort of how I did that. I went there for 6 months.
Well, especially in the sense that software for networks is closer to the hardware than maybe software is for some other disciplines, right? I mean, you need to have a good understanding of what the underlying hardware looks like in order to make software that's going to run well on an FPGA or on an ASIC or whatever.
That's probably true, but when I went to Metaswitch, the team I was on was doing mobile development. So I was working on Android and iOS apps.
All right.
It was in Metaswitch as a whole is mostly doing networky type stuff, lots of telecoms, but I was not.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So like probably the first 4 months or so of that internship, I was on what was called the innovation team, and we were just throwing stuff at a wall, seeing what we could come up with that might click. And then about, I guess in the last 2 months, we switched over to this SDN project.
Yeah, I was going to ask how that transition happened.
Yeah, and so there was this at the time a lot of energy around and excitement around OpenFlow, and we said, hey, this might be something cool that we could leverage because it's sort of innovative, and we're the innovations team, and Metaswitch as a whole has a lot of networking experience, so we could kind of come in here and do something really forward-looking. And so we started doing that. That was the first I had ever done any sort of networking stuff. It was very foreign to me, and definitely not what I signed up to do. But at the same time, it was kind of exciting because it was, it really felt like, oh, now I'm learning how things work for real under the covers.
Yeah, I've always loved that aspect of our job, like genuinely having a concept of how the internet works. There's not that many people who have that understanding. It is pretty exciting. I still find it exciting now.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember at the time, like telling my other, classmates at school, like I was working on networking stuff, and they were all like, "Ooh, it sounds real boring." But I thought it was way more exciting than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
And so we worked on that SDN project for a bit. I went back to school after the internship was done for another 6 months. Finished up my Capstone project, which was still mostly hardware, but a little bit of
What's Capstone, sorry?
Oh, sorry. Capstone is like it's the undergraduate like a thesis type thing at the school I went to. It's like in the engineering program, they had a team of 6 that worked together on like a year-long project. Generally, the idea was to do something ideally kind of innovative from the ground up. My team was working on an EEG headset to control a tablet. So we specifically with the goal of letting people type out messages without having control of their body.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, it was quite cool. There's a lot of learning to do there. We did manage to get it working, but it was a little bit slow and took some practice.
Have you seen that that amazing? Microsoft has done some amazing stuff in accessibility recently. They released this control, like an Xbox controller, but they deliberately made it like really open, and it has. I think it has a programmable API and things. I'm not intimately familiar with it, but people have been using it for loads of purposes other than just plugging into their Xbox. It seems like an amazing accessibility tool for making an accessible interface for things. Microsoft seems to have a gift for making things that people use in ways that they weren't intended. I think Kinect probably ended up being used for more cool university projects than it did for gaming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Oh, that's really interesting. And so then the OpenFlow thing that you worked on, did that come to fruition or?
Not really. We had a couple customers we were working with at the time and use cases, and it did see some use, but ultimately I think it was put on hold, and that's largely because Calico came around.
Right.
So that same team ultimately ended up being the team that was working on Calico. And I was actually one of the last folks on the team to switch from this OpenFlow project to Calico. Myself and Sean stayed on for a little bit longer.
I find that really interesting because having, people have heard my background before, but having come to Calico as a user, running it in our organization, the thing that gave me the warm and fuzzies about it was that I'd spent ages trying MPBGP and EVPN and OpenFlow and Juniper Contrail and all these other things, and they're all such complicated beasts. And yet, what Calico does, part of what it does well, is the fact that it's actually pretty easy to explain to someone who knows networking. There's nothing crazily high tech going on, and that's very much a positive comment. It's stuff that works and can be relied on. Okay, maybe the eBPF data plane is newer, but conceptually, it's so it is interesting that it went from the OpenFlow stuff to that.
Yeah, well, that was, I think, mostly Christopher Lilienstolpe coming in.
Mm-hmm.
That was his brainchild at the time. He joined the team and had this idea, and it certainly took off. And yeah, it was all exactly like you say, like born out of that simplicity was the goal. Coming from more traditional OpenStack networking solutions, which were not so easy to explain in terms of networking.
No. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can remember trying to, I won't specify which one it was, but trying to make a case for one of them and realizing that, I know a fair bit about networking, and I realized that I was just barely able to grasp it myself. And I was thinking, it's probably not great. If I can't explain it to someone else, then there's that old saying, isn't there? If you can't explain something to someone else, you don't really understand it.
Yeah.
So yeah, whereas Calico, I think I could have a pretty good stab at explaining it to someone else. Cool. All right. Well, I suppose we should move on, especially since we lost a little bit of time at the start due to my inability to set up the session properly. Just before we do, though, if anyone has any questions, for Casey about his background or anything that he just chatted about, or either of us for that matter, feel free. And like we said, we're always keen for interruptions, so feel free. We can always, the stuff that we were planning to cover today, we can always push it back. So if something interesting comes up, just shout. While we wait to see if anyone does ask anything else, I will just ask you what what kind of, well, I'm looking at two different questions. I'm thinking which one I like best. What's the? This sounds like a terrible interview question, but what kind of challenges do you find? Or which kind of positive? Let's try and put both questions together. Which kind of positive challenges do you find in what you do, and what are the kind of actual painful challenges that you find as a software developer?
Yeah, positive challenges and painful challenges. They kind of go hand in hand sometimes. You know, I think some of the most positive experiences is overcoming something that is maybe painful to start. But I feel like, especially nowadays, a lot of what challenges me is finding the best way to use my time, not so much, you know, writing the code once I've decided what to write, but actually deciding what the right thing to do is. We get so many great suggestions and requests and pull requests and to review and all these things, and it's just making sure that we're putting the code in the right place and that we're prioritizing the right things is quite challenging.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. You've got a finite amount of time at the end of the day, and trying to choose what the right thing to do with it.
Even the most complex bit of code is fine once you have mentally committed to the fact that it's the right thing to do and that you have the time allocated for it. But it's quite challenging getting to that point of weighing the opportunity costs of doing one thing versus some other things.
Yeah, that's always surprised me, because I can cobble together some code, but I'm definitely not a software developer, and or not by profession, and I'm always surprised. I get quite nervous of the initial step in a certain direction. Like, am I entirely committing my resources in the wrong direction? But I guess a certain amount of that comes to intuition after you've done something, after you've solved enough problems. That a lot of problems start to look like other problems once you see them for a while, don't they? So
they do, yeah, and you have to be a little bit wary of that, because you don't want to keep applying the same solution to something just because you're comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But certainly that process of getting comfortable with, maybe I'm going to write a few days worth of code and then throw it out, is something that I've gotten better with, but still not entirely. I mean, it's hard to ever be completely comfortable with that, because you put so much energy into and passion into that.
You mentioned about not committing to solving things in the way you've seen them solved before, but I saw this amazing YouTube video a couple of days ago about a financial exchange that wanted to solve the low latency trading challenge of how do you make it fair, and they were solving this with, I don't know, it was 50 kilometers or something of fiber on a reel. So rather than trying to slow down everyone's access to the exchange via some kind of insane buffering, which would be challenging in software, because you'd have to, we all know about NICs and buffering and all the complexities that can come out of that. They realized that all they would do was, to make it fair for human beings to operate against machines, was to have a reel of 50 kilometers of fiber, and everyone has to come in via that reel. I just thought it was a beautiful solution. No, there's not even any. It doesn't even require power. It's a cool example of like thinking outside the box.
That's very cool.
Yeah. All right. Let's move into the kind of harder content. So we said that we would kick off next with a little discussion and demo about the support that we now have for services in egress network policy rules, because this is quite a big deal, and we shouted about it a little bit when it first appeared, which was, when was that?
320.
20. I was going to say 19, so I'm glad you had it on top of the tip of your tongue. But so yeah, let's talk a bit about that. So the use case, first of all, I can remember being surprised. We talked about this offline, but I can remember being surprised that it wasn't possible to back a few years ago. It wasn't possible to write network policy against services. So how did you see the use case? I guess let's just stick to that question first of all. How do you see the use case apart from protecting the Kate's API itself?
Yeah. So this was actually, I mean, going back a ways, this is something when the Kubernetes networking SIG was originally coming up with the like core Kubernetes network policy API was debated for weeks, if not months. Should policy be defined in terms of pods or in terms of services?
Right.
And countless arguments and different reasons were given, and I certainly can't remember all of them because this was close to 4 years ago, probably. But ultimately, it was settled that it would be based on pods. And there's always been a bit of me thinking like services make this quite a bit easier because usually users are already thinking in terms of services when they're thinking of how their applications on Kubernetes communicate with each other.
Yes.
And so I started to think like, what are some easy increments we could do to provide this capability? Obviously, like you said, the first use case I was thinking of with respect to egress rules was the API server, because it's sort of a different case than most services. It's not like API server pods are not usually pod networked. They're host networked things, and they're often provisioned by your distro of Kubernetes itself rather than by yourself. And so they've kind of been hard to control access to in the past with
definitely.
regular network policy.
If that was even possible before I joined Tigera, I never quite figured it out. So
yeah, you would need to do some funky stuff and probably need to hard code some IP addresses or CIDRs or something in your policy to get that working. With Calico policies, you could use a network set that was kept up to date with the addresses of the servers, but again, tedious and not something that's especially user-friendly.
It would make me nervous as well, because any time that, having dealt a lot with I won't name the vendor actually, but any time that you're like securing the control plane, it should make you nervous, because if you cut yourself off, you're going to cause yourself a world of pain.
Yeah, and if you're running in a cloud and your instances are coming and going and the addresses are always changing, you need something to be automatically updating that set of IPs, and it's just not really tenable for most environments. So that one was front of mind for me, just because we had seen so many people ask for it, and I'd always felt like the answer was not really sufficient. There are other things as well. So one of the other use cases, when you're typically declaring policy, you're talking about both, which entities you want to allow or disallow communication to, but also the ports on which you want to allow that communication. And it's pretty easy to get those mismatched when you're declaring your policy in one API object and your actual application in another. And so for scenarios where, say, ports are changing from one version to another, there's a bit of complexity in keeping all of your config consistent. You know, we've seen people roll out updates to their application, forget an update to their network policy, and then things stop working, and it's kind of unclear why. So part of allowing the use of services in these rules is that we can imply or infer the port information from the service itself. And so that's now living closer to the application config than it is to the network policy rules themselves.
Yeah, it's almost like the old database thing, like the less times you have to specify any piece of information, the more consistent everything's going to be. And so if you're having to specify the port in the application itself and then the network policy all down the chain, then it's just an opportunity for inconsistency, isn't it? But if
yeah, exactly.
Less hard-coded things better. Yeah, okay, that's cool.
So we picked egress to do first for those reasons. There are some other use cases I've got on my mind, but those are sort of the ones that we've implemented for now.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I definitely don't want to make you promise anything. How nothing's ever easy, but was it a relatively easy thing, or was it or did it involve a lot of changes under the hood?
It was relatively easy. There wasn't any sort of major architectural changes that we needed to make. There were some there's a bit of plumbing to do in that there were new API objects that needed to get to places that they didn't previously need to get to. But that's something I had done before. So in this case, I was able to follow some existing patterns rather than inventing something from the ground up.
Nice.
And then probably going back to the challenges question, like naming and like defining APIs is also kind of falls into that big challenge bucket. It's not exactly writing code, but you're setting something in stone, and so you need to think a little bit about it.
Yeah, now that's something I don't have much experience of, because the coding I've done has always been to work with myself. But I suppose when you're defining an API that other people are going to be used, you have to try and anticipate in what way it might be used and name it appropriately, and things sometimes get used in a way that you didn't quite imagine that they might, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I try to, when doing API design, always look well beyond what the immediate use case is, and then rein it back until I get something I'm comfortable is like the minimal set required for what we need to do now, but also I'm comfortable will be extensible for some potential future scenarios that might arise.
Yeah, awesome. I'll just remind people that if anyone has any questions about the stuff we're chatting about, feel free. I've got my eye on the chat over here. It's all quiet at the moment. All right, is there anything else you think we should talk about before we jump into a demo? I think we're pretty much bang on time in terms of where we want to be, so maybe we should jump across?
Yeah, I'd be happy to show some of it off.
Great. Well, hopefully my technical problems are a thing of the past. So let's see how smooth this transition can be. So if I'll put us behind the prompt for now, intentionally. So that should be readable. Is that Tmux or screen?
Yeah, this is Tmux.
So I'm not sure if you can even. I think it's probably readable. I can read it. So if anyone can't read it, let us know. Does Tmux deal well with that? Because that's why I asked the question, because I know that when I used to use screen, I found that resizing didn't really.
Yeah, it does pretty well. I mean, we'll get stuff on a few different lines now. We'll see what it looks like as I as I do it, but it resizes pretty well.
Yeah, I used to think I understood computers until I started to learn about terminal emulation, and then I just realized there's a whole minefield there that I'd never even really given much consideration to. Cool. All right, fantastic. So let's dive in. So I don't know too much about how you structured the demo, so I'll just kind of let you lead if that's all right.
Sure. Yes, I mostly wanted to just show the two different use cases that we were talking about there. It's a pretty informal demo. You can see right here, I've got a Kubernetes cluster. I've already got Calico installed right up here. Other than that, there's just your kind of basic pods, DNS, kube proxy, kube system stuff. So I've got that. On this pane, I've got, I'm logged into one of the nodes so that we can take a look at what Calico might be doing on the data plane. So you can look at what kind of IP sets and such that Calico has created.
Nice.
Nothing super interesting right there. And then down here, I've got a whole bunch of YAMLs that we'll take a look at and install.
Fantastic. We just had confirmation that it's all lovely and readable, so you're good as you are.
Perfect. So first one I'm going to look at is this access deployment. This is not the image that I thought it was, but we'll roll with it anyway. So I'm going to create a pod that I'm just going to use to try and access the Kubernetes API. This is, funnily enough, my fork of the Ubuntu Docker image, which I created several years ago, and I no longer remember what the difference between the upstream one is, but I use it in all of my demos anyway.
Nice.
So I'm going to run this pod on the cluster.
Moderately terrifying. I always use NetShoot. Have you encountered NetShoot?
I think I've used that before.
Yeah, it's a really nice kind of pod when you just need something to jump off.
Yeah, I should probably update this, but it has been serving me well for a while.
You're not giving it a name. I hope you're not giving it a name and becoming attached to it.
Not yet.
Like
but that's a good idea. Maybe I should. So I'm going to use this exec command to hop in here. Hopefully it doesn't have curl, so I'm going to just grab that.
So that top left pane is the CLI of the pod you just the Ubuntu pod you just created.
Yeah, I think that I had left a network policy around. So this is showing that default deny is working, but so I'm going to update that.
That was intentional, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I'm going to install curl because I need that.
While that's happening, I need you to show me how you're getting that ghosting effect on your tab completion. Where I know how to get tab completion working, but you've got it so it kind of shows the potential.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
You can that's part of. Yeah, I'll tell you about that. I have to double check exactly what config is doing that, but
yeah, that's nice.
It's part of my Zish config. So yeah, I should be able to hit the Kubernetes API server. I don't have any credentials, so it's giving me forbidden here, which is fine, but
Perfect.
the request is succeeding. So I'm going to stick that default deny back. This guy.
Yeah, perfect.
except that I renamed the file, so it's default to now egress. I'll show you what that looks like. It's pretty straightforward. Selects everything and allows nothing
Great.
in terms of egress traffic. And so if I pop back here,
it's probably worth highlighting, because we've got people who've got a huge range of experience with Calico, that's a Calico network policy, not a Kate's network policy.
yes, that's correct. I think everything I've got in this demo are Calico network policies.
Yeah, perfect.
You can see that here. This is the project calico.org v3 API version.
Yeah, I can definitely remember that being non-obvious to me at one point. So
yeah, the syntaxes are similar but different.
Yeah, extended superset, I guess.
Yeah. So as you can see, this is now not resolving. That's because you can't talk to DNS. And so I have this policy. This is actually a Calico global network policy, just because for my purposes, I sort of feel like everything in the cluster should be able to talk to kubedns. So this is going to select every pod in the cluster. And here's the new service match capabilities that we're trying to show here. So we're going to allow the service named kubedns in the kube system namespace.
Yeah. That simple.
Sorry?
It's that simple.
It's quite simple. While developing this, I was like, yeah, this is going to be great. And then the first time I actually used it, I thought, holy, that's just way nicer.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It like finally hit home.
Yeah.
So I'm going to...
Yeah, sometimes you don't know how painful your workflow is until you don't do it that way anymore.
That was the wrong policy. We want to allow to DNS. So that's going to allow to DNS. This is still going to fail because the DNS lookup will succeed now. We won't get this could not resolve host, but we still don't have policy allowing us to talk to the API server. And so I've got this other policy, allow API server, which looks almost exactly the same as the previous policy, except the service we're allowing to is the Kubernetes service in the default namespace.
When these manifests were being defined, or resource definitions were being defined, was there ever talk of making like a comma separated list a thing? Because you mentioned about the fact it looks the same apart from one.
So we did talk a little bit about having the ability to specify multiple services in here. And I think we've done similar stuff before in other places, but the learning that I've sort of taken in over time is that too much complication or providing too many ways to do the same thing can
definitely
cause a lot of confusion.
Yeah, definitely.
100%
So, agree.
We could have this sort of list here, but it's the same logically as having two of these.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
So if you wanted to do API access and kubedns access in the same policy, you could do something like this. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm doing this separately. One, because like in my fake cluster, like logically I want every pod to be able to talk to kubedns, but I might not want every pod to be able to talk to the Kubernetes API server.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, and it's a really good point actually, that too many different valid network policies that are all valid it can be a problem. I know that in my old place before, when we were still learning this stuff, there was an awful lot of kind of like finding a network policy that worked, and then everyone just copied and pasted it because no one wanted to no one fully understood how it worked, and that was because the combination of YAML being a bit of a I don't want to share my thoughts on YAML, but YAML plus the complexities of network policy plus the complexities of the implementation underneath was a lot.
There's a lot of sort of nuanced things that you try to express via network policy, and I think in the beginning we certainly got some things wrong and made them difficult to express via YAML.
Yeah.
And so I think this falls into that same bucket of just trying to keep it simple. There's an explicit name and namespace that you can match here, and if you want multiple, you just duplicate this section rather than having lists inside of lists.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah, we're going to create this one.
Castle Karate there.
And this will allow to the API server.
Yep.
And now I can once again reach the API server from this pod.
Yeah, like you said, it's just so nice, isn't it? It's so easy.
It's quite easy. If we come over here, actually I should double check that I am on the right node. So this cluster is actually running as a local kind cluster. So I want to be on this node because this is the node that has my pod on it. So I'm going to hop in there. Quickly grab the IP set tool. So these all end up ultimately getting resolved into IP sets. This guy at the bottom here is the address of my API server.
Yeah, nice.
So you get pods in kube system. You can see kube API server is running on that address. And you'll notice it has this port, and this is actually being pulled right out of the endpoint definition for that service.
And the one above is the DNS one.
Yep. This is the DNS policy that I created. So you can see those couple lines resolved into several different protocols and ports that kubedns is serving on. And so as the writer of the policy, I don't need to actually think about, is this application going to be using TCP or UDP? And
that's fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic. I think anyone who's ever had to administer a firewall as part of their job knows, the less you have to ask those questions, the better.
Yeah. There it is. So yeah, you can see this is all coming from the endpoint slice.
Fantastic.
Information about that service.
So is there any complexity around churn? You mentioned about if IPs were changing in the cloud, that kind of thing. Is it fairly instantaneous, or are there other kind of caveats or interesting things about IPs churning or anything like that you need to think about or be aware of, or is it just?
You shouldn't need to think about it. I mean, everything in Kubernetes is really eventually consistent. When you ask the API to do something, it makes that change, and then the rest of the system goes out to actually enact that change.
Yeah.
But since this is all driven off of endpoints, it includes stuff like, it's sort of at the same speed as services act, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Cool. Fantastic.
so, yep.
Yeah, fantastic. I love how simple the demo is. Oh, someone's behind you. I love how simple the demo is, and yeah, it's like you say, it's just a real lifesaver or changer, quality of life improvement, I should say. All right, I'll switch back to the cameras. So I'm just looking at what we've got left to chat over, and I think we're probably I think we're both due on another meeting in about 10 minutes. So we've got about 5 minutes, I'd say. So I think we should just quickly chat over what other future network policy changes or considerations we might want to make. Now I'm really conscious of not asking you to kind of commit to anything, and it's all subject to actual availability and so on. So this is more about what do you think would be a nice thing to approach, and rather than what is kind of guaranteed on the roadmap.
Yep.
So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, there's certainly a few things on my mind. So like I said, this is in 320 egress only.
Mm-hmm.
In 321, we're adding support for ingress rules, which we're doing as a second stage just because the use cases there were a little bit less urgent, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It still has that kind of simple syntax, which is going to be appealing for a lot of people, but you don't have the same benefit of port information or for ingress, because the ports specified on services are really for accessing that service, not allowing from that service.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I understand. I'm just trying to get my head around what the differences in the implementation would be, and also what the different scenario where you would want it would be.
I think the main scenario is consistency with your egress rules, and it makes it a little bit easier to decouple from labels.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing this by service name, you don't need to keep your service, your network policy, and your deployment all in sync in terms of label taxonomy.
Right.
Which, is for some people, I think, an appealing thing. For others, they want to be able to use labels to get that sort of more dynamic selection capability.
I've actually thought about having a future Calico Live specifically about labels, because it's such an interesting area. There's so many, there's more than one right way to skin it, and there's quite a lot of learnings that people pick up when they've actually run a cluster for a while that are not immediately obvious.
It can be quite overwhelming for people new to
for sure,
to Kubernetes and to network policy.
How to do it right. I might ask you offline, actually. We'll have a chat about who might be the best people for that. I mean, I have my own opinions from having done it, but my deployments have been small compared to some people. So,
in terms of, there's other areas with respect to service network policy that I'd like to see as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would be nice to be able to select services at a top level. So say I want this policy to apply to this service. This is more of a...
Say that again. I didn't grasp that one, actually, Casey. Can you...
So there's sort of three places that selection occurs in policies. There's selecting egress, who you're allowed to talk to, selecting ingress, who's allowed to talk to me, and then there's what I usually refer to as the top level selection, which is who does this policy apply to?
Like, right. Yeah. Okay.
What set of things am I applying these rules to?
Yes. Okay. Got it. Right. I understand now.
And so it's that top level selector that I feel like there would be a ton of value to be able to select at the service level, because services tend to have lots of different ways they can be accessed. They can be accessed directly by their pod IPs that are backing them. You can access them via their cluster IP, sometimes a node port or an external IP via a load balancer. And so covering all of those cases currently without that service level selector, you need to do individually. And Calico policy lets you do that, but you need to think a little bit about it.
Yeah,
Kubernetes
network policy
doesn't.
It would be quite easy to miss a case, wouldn't it?
Yeah. If you're using Kubernetes policies, it just doesn't have the primitives in some cases to control access on things like node ports. And so that's something that has been in the back of my mind and I would like to address, but it's certainly much more of a challenge, I think, to get the implementation right than these two scenarios.
Yeah. I think you're thinking a little bit about host network pods as well, aren't you? But it's early days, right?
Very early days. That one's been more of a wish list item for a long time. Just being able to apply policies to host network pods sort of at a fine-grained level rather than right now you kind of have to select the whole node. Well,
I imagine we'll probably get someone pop up in Calico users after having watched this with some thoughts about that. So we'll gather it together.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. All right. Well, we're nearly out of time already. So I knew, as always, we always go longer than we think we will in these. So we've got a little bit of material for next time. And if anyone has anything they particularly like us to cover off next time, then I'm on Calico users and get in touch. And if not, then Casey, I'll let you go and have another cup of coffee. You're due on a meeting in a minute with me, aren't you? I think.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, cool. All right. I will see you there. Casey, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. And I think the next one, I believe it's in 2 weeks' time. But it's I'll publish the definite date the same way that I published this one. And also people can, I can't believe I'm going to say this, people can press the bell to like and subscribe. I'm a professional YouTuber now. Thanks, Casey. I'll speak to you later on.
Thanks, Chris. It was great to be here.
Bye.
A lot of fun.